for, oh, I guess we're on.
Famous last words. Hold on one second. Governor, do you?
I think I am. I am on. This is awesome.
Great.
All right, by my watch, it's 9:05. Director, if you want to get us started.
Can do, Mr. Chairman. First, I could do a roll call for quorum.
That would be great.
Commissioner Racines. Here. Commissioner Pope.
Here.
Commissioner Wallace.
Here.
Commissioner Meyer. Here. Commissioner Naves.
Excused? See
And
if she joins.
Commissioner Reville did mention that he may have a personal obligation, but Commissioner Reville?
Excuse?
Chairman Gordon.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Very good.
Without further ado, I'm happy to review today's agenda and then take it from there.
Very good. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So first thing, we will go through 4 sets of minutes. Happy to walk through those because they're hot off the presses, but that will cover a few of the special meetings we've had over the holidays as we went through the procurement process as well as our December meeting. We'll go through our monthly budget review as of January 31st. It seems that we'll go through it in detail, but it does look like we've got some settlement now with the new hires on our 100 series, which is great. And we'll do a brief update on the rulemaking for those that are currently in progress. We'll do a stable token industry update. I'll keep it a little less globe-trotting this time around. There's plenty of development here domestically to cover off on. And then I will hand it over to Deborah Brooks for a discussion of the draft, the first draft of the regular rules for reserves management. After that, we will go through our qualified vendor assessment memo, which has been just, again, I will preliminarily thank everyone for their incredible amount of work and lift on that. It was many hours over very few days, but they'll be self-evident when we go through that. We'll talk through the candidate blockchain assessment, which is a follow-up from our last discussion around how we want to proceed with updating criteria and approaching others in the industry to make sure we've got a full population of people who may be interested in launching Wyoming stable tokens in that flow. Cover off on next steps ahead of our March 20th meeting, and then just cover off on a couple other events, and then we'll have public comment. Mr. Chairman, sometimes we approve the agenda formally, sometimes we do not. I'm happy to go at your pleasure.
I think probably it makes sense to have them approved, so I would first state for the minutes, you've all had a chance to review them. If there are additions, we can take these either one at a time or together. But let me just ask first if there are any additions or changes, comments. If there are none, I would entertain a motion, either individually or grouped.
I move to approve the agenda as written in full.
I'm sorry, I was on the minutes. I'd already moved forward. That's fine. Yeah, is the agenda, if that has been moved, is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay,
Aye.
the agenda is approved. Thank you. We have Ms. Naves on.
Good morning,
Thank
Governor.
you. Thank you, Commissioner.
Mr. Chairman, since we've already gone through the process of seeing if there are any additions or anything to the minutes, I would go ahead and move to approve the minutes as well.
So those would be the minutes of the December 19th, January 3rd, January 30th, and February 14th meetings.
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, that motion's been made. Is there support for that motion?
Second.
It's been seconded by Commissioner Racines. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that motion carries. Director, we're back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So with the agenda and the minutes out of the way, next thing on the docket is our monthly budget review, and we're going back to having these now that we've got some volume and some stability month to month. I've gone back to providing both the summary level detail and the detailed level of detail. So for the summary sheet, again, we break these down predominantly by series. As usual, the main driver of costs to the agency are salaries and benefits. As I just noted a moment ago, worth repeating here. Now that we have the full team on board, working full months and receiving their benefits as elected, our expectation is the January numbers here will be consistent through the remainder of the biennial fiscal year 2025, ending on June 30th of 2026. So those are the numbers we're using in our projections. For travel in January, there is not much, but we do expect that there will be some expenses for travel that'll hit in February, both for my travel to Boise and Dublin, as well as some conferences that Commissioner Naves and Deborah have attended, both in-state and out-of-state. In terms of hardware and software, there's a fairly large line item there in January. Not sure why this took as long to hit as it did, but that is the laptops, screens, printers, and VPN devices for the team. So that all got bundled into one month, and that's where that hit. And that also is in addition to our recurring SaaS services, Notion, OpenAI, X, Zoom, et cetera. And then telecom is again reflective of the fact that we now have the full team on board with mobile devices that are in use. No professional services have hit yet for this biennium. We do expect the first invoice from Paul Hastings will hit in February for the work that they've been doing as an external contractor to provide legal assistance. And that brings us to a monthly expense of about just over $96,000 for January. In total, in aggregate, for the biennial fiscal year so far, we have expended $341,343.77, which is 5.89% of our $5.8 million budget available over the course of the biennium, leaving us with $5,458,656 left, or about 94 and change percent of the budget. We continue to try to be good fiscal stewards here, and I don't expect that to change in this fiscal year or calendar year. Moving on to the detail, there's nothing here that I don't think we've already covered. But again, if there are any questions, I know it's a little small and difficult to read, but if there are any questions on this, please do let me know. I'm happy to answer on either document.
Commissioner Meyer.
Yeah, the IT hardware, it says standard laptops. It says standard laptops, but there's not a number there. How many laptops was that? Looks like about 52, 55.
Yep, it was 5 laptops, so we each got one. The laptop that I had previously was a loaner, so
Okay.
that was replaced with a more functional one.
Yeah, just my old appropriation dates, I'd like to know, kind of know the details on that. So
Sure.
you don't have to provide it here, but I'm glad that you've got that detail. Thank you.
Any other questions through the chair?
Questions? Very good.
So just as a quick update on the next item, which is rulemaking. This is in reference to both the procurement rules and the Wyoming Public Records Act and the fees associated with creating copies and other materials for people who file those requests. Those were both approved by the governor's office some days ago. They are in my inbox, ready for the next step now that we're done with the proposals. So I expect those will be introduced for the public comment period in the not too distant future. There are no other commission actions required at this time for that process. It'll be on myself and the team to get that moving, but that is where that currently stands. Any questions on either the procurement side or the Wyoming Public Records Act rules that we put forth in December?
Questions? Very good. With that, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Moving on to the stable token industry update. Again, I'm going to keep this one domestic for the month because there has been a lot of movement as a result of the Trump administration embracing digital assets writ large. One of the first pieces of literature that came out of the administration was the executive order on strengthening American leadership in digital financial technology. It's fairly brief, but it does touch on a couple of different topics. What I find worth highlighting here is the President's Council of Advisors on Digital Assets. That is where the administration is looking to build kind of a forum of people not only from industry, but also across multiple different agencies, SEC, CFTC, OCC, et cetera. The executive order comes out pretty forcefully against central bank digital currencies and in favor of stablecoins. So that leads to the next item on the list here, federal stablecoin legislation. There is the Genius Act in the Senate and the Stable Act in the House. The Genius Act has a lot of shared DNA, perhaps for obvious reasons, with the Lummis-Gillibrand Payment Stablecoin Act. So if we recall, I think it would have been what month it would have been exactly, but about this time last year, I think would have been when the LGPSA was released. It was 180 pages, fairly robust. About half of it was on what happens in receivership with around stablecoins, digital assets. And there was a fairly large number of agencies involved. The current version of the Genius Act, again with some shared DNA there, whittles that oversight down to the Federal Reserve and the OCC, depending on who's issuing and how. And I would note from our perspective, or from my perspective, there was in the original LGPSA a $10 billion threshold. If you were a state issuer and you crossed that threshold, you had to convert into a federally chartered bank or trust type of structure. The Stable Act is in the House as we speak. That has oversight predominantly laying with the OCC, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. And there's also a separate bill that's introduced by Representative Maxine Waters to kind of temper some of that. So we'll see how this resolves. This is something that we're obviously keeping an eye on for obvious reasons, but we are still moving forward with our own rulemaking at the state level, and we'll be talking more about that in a minute. Last thing on this list is federal agency updates. I'll provide a high level, and then Commissioner Naves, I know, wanted to speak on the SEC Crypto Task Force briefly, but I will say there's been some fairly significant shakeups in administrations of these agencies. I don't think this is a surprise to anybody, but the SEC is now being led by Mark Ueda, who's always been predominantly in support of digital assets and a dissenting opinion through many of the Gensler decisions. And Commissioner Hester Peirce has been nominated, is now serving as the head of the SEC Crypto Task Force. On the CFTC side, Caroline Pham is now in that position, also someone who's been supportive of digital assets, and we're seeing some shakeups at the CFTC and other agencies as well. We are continuing to monitor, similar to how we did with the FinCEN BSA advisory group. There are a lot of calls for comment or for roundtables with these different agencies. We're doing some soft reach out around that. And of course, as things become more formal, we will let the commission know, as we did with FinCEN. But we're just making sure we keep an eye on it, because I do believe that as a state issuing a digital asset, we have a very specific and unique take on what it is we're building and how it could fit potentially into a changing model in real time. So if there are, I'm happy to answer any questions on that, but through the chair, I know Commissioner Naves wanted to speak on the Crypto Task Force specifically.
Thank you, Director. Commissioner Naves.
I apologize. Was I called on? My computer froze for a minute.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. So following up on what Anthony was saying, it has been quite an interesting week on some of the actions that the SEC has been taking in this industry. What we're seeing is actions of dismissal of litigation. They are also being put on hold or ceased, or investigations are also being terminated. Of importance have been the decision to halt the litigation against Binance for 60 days, the dismissal of the lawsuit against Coinbase, and the termination of investigation against Uniswap. What that is showing to us is an administration that is seeking to look at these actions one more time, understand the reasoning why of these cases were pursued, and make a determination whether it still merits litigation or not. What we're also seeing is a potential shift in how the SEC is looking at these things, of really looking for fraud against investors versus non-fraud and just failure to register, which has been some of the prior cases in this area. So there has been more focus on consumer protection, and instead of administrative or potentially clerical failures, which has been some of the causes of action in the past, and an administration that again is looking to understand why these cases were brought to start with, if there's still merit any action, and putting in place also the rules of the road so that other market participants can come in and innovate in this area, understanding what they need to do from a federal perspective around registration of their products. So it's a very positive move forward. We don't know how positive it's going to be yet. We just know it's positive. And it looks like we're going to have brighter lines going forward.
Great.
Thank you, Anthony.
Commissioner. Are there questions? I do have one for either the director or Commissioner Naves or perhaps Commissioner Wallace. Are we seeing anything on the FDIC front?
Mr. Chairman, in terms of digital assets, perhaps a little less. One of the things I did not mention was I do believe in the executive order on digital innovation that the FDIC and the Federal Reserve were specifically left out of the President's Council on digital assets, or the working group on digital asset markets. So I would note that. I'd also note that there have been a series of hearings on debanking, particularly around the crypto industry, and some of the actions there by the Fed or FDIC that could have resulted in that, including testimony from Austin Campbell, who spoke with us last February about what he's seeing. So that is where, from my perspective, that's where some of that action is happening now. Perhaps it needs to be cleared up first before there's a broader discussion about how they would be getting involved with the new digital asset frameworks that are being put into place. But some of that is certainly speculation on my part.
Thank you. If nothing more, then
Well, I will add one thing, just kind of put on my list here, not on the agenda, because I simply haven't had a chance to view it yet. But I do believe Senator Lummis's first meeting of the subcommittee on digital assets that she now chairs under the Senate Banking Committee and Tim Scott was yesterday. So I will take a look at that when I've got a little bit more time and report back in.
very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So moving on to our next topic here, and I'll just cue this up for our Chief Risk and Compliance Officer, Deborah Brooks. So Deb, as we had talked about when she came on, pretty immediately started looking at different frameworks all around the world of how different regulatory bodies were looking at reserves management vis-a-vis digital assets. So that includes guidance from the New York Department of Financial Services, proposed legislation from the federal level at the US. Obviously, none of it's even seen a floor vote yet, but looked at those as well as proposed or promulgated guidance all around the world. So JFSA, Hong Kong Monetary Authority, and did a really robust job on that. I'll let her, again, get into the details of this, but just to frame this appropriately, this is the first draft of the proposed rules for the state of Wyoming on how we would handle reserves management. And the goal here is to walk through this, not at the 10,000-foot level, but not line by line either, and then kind of introduce this not for the public comment process. Obviously, that'll be downstream of the formal rulemaking process, but just kind of get this into the public forum and see if we could start pulling in some of the SMAs we've been working with, the working groups, or others who may have strong opinions on this, to see if, to make sure we're looking under every stone and picking up every rock on the way to getting a really robust V1 of this introduced through the rulemaking process. So without further ado, I will stop talking, Mr. Chairman, I will hand it over to you, and then through the chair, I would turn it over to Deborah Brooks.
Ms. Brooks,
Hi, good morning. Can you hear and see me?
we can. Thank
Great.
you for joining.
Thank you. Good morning, Governor. Good morning, Commissioners. And thank you, Director Apollo. By way of background, the Wyoming Stable Token Act has directed the Commission to create a set of rules and regulations with the specific goal of safeguarding the Wyoming stable tokens and critically the underlying reserves. As the Commission is aware, the statute dictates that we must hold these reserves either in cash, in United States treasuries with a maturity of 1 year or less, or through repurchase agreements with a term of 30 days or less. Consequently, we have been developing a set of rules, as Director Apollo indicated, for the management of the US dollar denominated reserves. I contend that the reserves management rules will aim to establish clear, understandable standards that will guarantee the sufficiency and transparency of the assets backing, safeguarding consumer trust while fostering a secure environment for innovation. Once completed, the rules will not only be consistent with the Act, but align with the core goals of ensuring both the continuing growth and success of the Wyoming Stable Token, with the ultimate beneficiary of Wyoming schools. As a result of the, we start over again, as the reserves management rules is a novel approach within Wyoming, I want to explain to the commissioners some high-level key points. The first is the limited delegation of fiscal authority. This delegation is necessary to reduce friction in the daily operations and enable immediate, efficient management of the Wyoming Stable Token, as well as the underlying reserve assets, while maintaining necessary oversight. If approved, the Commission will grant the executive director and senior staff limited authority to manage both the Wyoming Stable Token and financial accounts. That includes opening and closing accounts, creating internal policies, funds transfers, establishing wallet addresses, and entering into necessary agreements with initial token holders and financial institutions. I want to importantly note that the Commission may alter, amend, or rescind any or all part of the delegated authority at any time. The second is the issuance and redemption of the Wyoming Stable Token. These rules will outline the process for onboarding and offboarding initial token holders. Critically, these rules will mandate the one-to-one US dollar backing for the Wyoming Stable Token issuance upon payment and completion verification. Conversely, initial token holders can redeem the stable token for the US dollar at any time, subject to verification and absent the triggering of specific events. Generally, the customers of the initial token holders are prohibited from requesting issuance and redemption directly from the Commission. However, under certain limited circumstances, a customer may request redemptions and only redemptions at this juncture directly from the Commission. The last bucket is reserves management asset. This will establish and manage separate trust accounts held for the Commission and customers. Consistent with the Act, these accounts will hold assets in cash, short-term securities, or repurchase agreements with the goal of reaching and maintaining a minimum of 102% above the reserve amounts. As any excess funds above the reserves amount will be initially transferred to the Commission's administrative accounts, and any excess from the Commission accounts shall be transferred to the Wyoming Schools Foundation programs. In your packet, you should receive a draft of the reserve management rules. And as Commissioner Apollo has noted, we welcome any advice and feedback from the subject matter administrators. There is no formal action that's required by the Commission at this time. I do want to highlight that the draft is just that, a draft, and could be and likely will be amended before it's presented to the commission for a full review and vote. I am open if there are any questions.
Are there questions? Ms. Brooks, I have one, and I'm looking, I believe it, I don't think these pages are numbered, but I think it's the third page under the Commission Limited Delegation of Fiscal Authority, and under Section 4A, Romanet 3, just would ask you to sort of explain to me what create, approve, amend, and maintain the terms and conditions of that list, what you envision the scope of that to be.
Thank you for the question, Commissioner and Chairman. The purpose is to allow the terms and conditions to alert the initial token holders and those who use or utilize the Wyoming stable tokens, the rules, if you will, for utilizing the token. As it was pointed out to me, the rules follows the token. So even if the token is issued and then resold later down the road, the terms and conditions will apply. I'm envisioning it spells out the liabilities that we are willing to bear. It also will give those who use the token our rules, particularly if we learn that the token is being used for illicit purposes, the potential actions that could be taken.
Thank you. Other questions? Commissioner Wallace.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'm just wanting to, and I might be getting a little bit too much into the weeds at this point, but my question is regarding the cash that's backing the token. And if we've determined how that would be held, and to ensure that that would still be required to be pledged under the typical state requirements as far as, like the
Fully collateralized.
fully collateralized.
Through the chair, thank you for your question. As I understand it, the cash, as you're aware, by the act dictates how the reserves must be managed through the life cycle. By that, I mean from the time that the coin is issued until the time it is been minted redeemed or burned. So if I understand your question, and please clarify if I am not, the goal is to maintain the reserves at a minimum of 102% above the reserve amount. Of course, the commission can increase that level at its leisure. So ultimately the goal is to maintain the 102% reserves. And once we exceed that, we will then follow the Act's dictate, which is to move those excess funds to the administrator's account, and then from there, any excess would go to the Wyoming school programs. So the goal is to be very careful and deliberate to ensure that the funds is fully secured and collateralized throughout. That is, from the Act, our primary responsibility, and that is what I believe the reserves management rule should accomplish.
Mr. Chairman. So I guess just to confirm, I was kind of specifically talking about the cash balances, not necessarily the treasuries. So when those balances would be held at, assuming some bank or something, would those balances would be collateralized and backed up with treasuries as well?
We haven't made it, yes, through the chair, we have through our discussions with the Chief Financial Officer, Joseph Saldana, we were in discussions as to how the money should be apportioned, whether it's in cash, whether it's in reverse repos, or whether it's in treasuries. A decision has not been made at this juncture, the level of asset mix among the three buckets.
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Pope.
I think maybe Mr. Wallace and I think a little bit more in the same terms on this. One of our RFPs is for custody of that, that cash and those investments. And that's one of the things we would be working through with whoever is chosen for the custody, is how that cash will be backed and collateralized. So I think that once we determine who the custody agent will be, then the idea is to have, yes, that the cash at all times collateralized or insured the same way that the WIST will be. And was that a little closer to what you were looking for, Mr. Wallace?
Thank you, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And Ms. Brooks, I think Article 15, Section 7, if I'm looking at the right place, really talks about, those are the requirements for cash deposited in Wyoming institutions.
Mr. Chairman?
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Director Apollo.
So just dovetailing off of what Commissioner Pope says, there's still some discussion about what the structure is going to look like at our counterparty on the reserves management side. I will add that when we did the request for qualifications, that was one of the questions that we did ask, right, to ensure that they could have that collateral backing behind the cash as well, because we know that's part of the broader state Wyoming Constitution, even if it's outside the scope of perhaps the Wyoming Stable Token Act. So that was kind of the gate to get in there. We're still, to Ms. Brooks' point, we are still working through the specific structure. And I believe, we'll talk perhaps a little bit more about that when we talk about the vendor selection here, but I do expect that'll be part of the negotiations as well to formalize that structure, because there are some options in front of us based on size and scale of the fund, et cetera. But yes, that is certainly on the docket.
And Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Pope.
Oh, and kind of a little bit off of that topic, one of our RFPs is also to construct a control system. This is a great start, and I recognize the wonderful work that Ms. Brooks has done on this. It is the beginning of the process, but when we have comments on the control structure, when we onboard and the vendor for the creation of that, they will also advise us on our role in the oversight side of the stable token, and they will very probably have some, what I foresee, very minor changes to this document as well before it goes to press, so to speak. So I think that's one thing that I'm looking forward to, is hearing their comments once that happens too.
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner Pope. And I don't want to get too into the weeds, but just because I remember this a little bit from my time as treasurer, and that Section 7 reads all money belonging to the state, which is an interesting concept considering that we're talking about a stable token. So I don't know if that helps to inform or if it further muddies the water, but it's at least a thought that we should bear in mind with regard to cash deposited in Wyoming institutions. That helps. Director Apollo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Ms. Brooks. So I know we've gone through kind of the detailed version of the memo. I would ask the commission if it behooves us again to go through just the chapters and what each chapter is. I think we have 5 chapters in here. Just have Ms. Brooks just walk us through what those chapters are, what they encompass, because as Commissioner Pope alluded to, we have our standard general provisions where there are some definitions that I think may be worth covering off on, just to kind of get across how we're thinking about the forms of the token as it kind of moves through its life cycle. Issuance controls are in here. So again, I'll let the commission make that determination, but I know Deb is more than ready to kind of speak through it at a high level and just cover off on what is in each of these chapters to kind of frame it, if that's desired.
Ms. Brooks, did you have any color you wanted to add to this conversation?
Not much. I did give, thank you for the question. I did provide the commission a high-level summary. I can give a little lower in altitude summary. Chapter 1 provides the general definitions that will be used throughout the rules, and including the limited delegation of fiscal authority that the commissions will delegate to the director and senior staff. Chapter 2 is the issuance of the Wyoming stable token itself, which will discuss the onboarding of the initial token holder, how the coin will be issued, and who would be entitled to receive the token, and equally important, who will not. And as I indicated earlier, it would be the customers of the initial token holders will not generally be permitted to receive the the Wyoming stable token. Chapter 3, which is the chapter which I believe is the most equally important, if not the most important, is the reserve asset management, which is still under construction or work in progress, which establishes the accounts for that the commissioners will hold, as well as the accounts that will be for the benefit of the initial token holders as the customers of the commission. It'll also discuss the deposits of funds and record keeping. The 4th chapter is the redemption of the stable token, which again will go through the process of the redemption rights for the initial token holder and the limited rights for the customer who, if exigent circumstances exist, may be able to seek redemption directly from the commission. But again, it's a process. We're still filtering it out if we require some type of judicial order, for example, in order to initiate the process of redemption. Of course, the customer at that juncture would have to undergo a compliance or know your customer KYC onboarding process before any monies could be redeemed to the customer.
Thank you. Questions? Director, what is your, I mean, this is no action item. Is there any further, Commissioner Pope, Commissioner Wallace, Commissioner Naves, Commissioner Meyer, Commissioner Racinas? We can move on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Deb, again, for helping put that all together when there's been a couple of other parallel work streams going on. Speaking of which, at this point, I think we could turn to the request for proposal vendor recommendation memo. So this is downstream of all the conversations we've been having with qualified vendors. Specifically, this is downstream of the oral interviews we've been having over the course of the last week. And this is where we would like to present the results of the evaluation committee. So essentially the scoring and ranking of potential vendors across both RFPs and potentially functions therein for who we would like to enter into negotiations with to bring us forward on the development, deployment, and ongoing management of a Wyoming stable token. So in terms of the background, I think this is very familiar to the background from about 2 weeks ago, just talking through how the RFPs came together, what they constitute, when they were due, and how they were evaluated. I will again reiterate that the evaluation committees were composed of commissioners, agency resources, and independent subject matter advisors. Commissioners and agency resources are de facto bound to the State Ethics and Disclosure Act, as well as the 1997 Code of Ethics Executive Order that prevents conflicts of interests. We then had SMAs sign a separate code of conduct, and that was as early as the end of last year. Towards the end of last year, we set up the working groups. And even further than that, following some of the discussion and points that Commissioner Revelle had brought up along the way, we did an additional conflict check in the process to make sure that if anyone who was going to be participating in the evaluation committees had any kind of business relationship, familiar relationship whatsoever, directly with a potential vendor, they were recused from that particular evaluation committee. So we wanted to err on the side of conservatism in that capacity, and that's how those evaluation committees came together. During the special meeting we had on February 14th, the commission did approve of the list of 19 qualified vendors who were invited to then present oral interviews. Those 19 discussions happened over the course of 6 business days. These were all an hour plus long, starting on February 18th and ending on February 25th. And you can see the breakdown of how many vendors were in each of the respective RFPs. You'll notice RFP 1 is a little bit overloaded. That's because there was overlap between vendors that qualified both RFP 1 and RFP 2. So you spoke to them about in the same time for different topics. And moving on to the analysis of ranked qualified vendors for negotiations. So in terms of RFP 1, which is generally for token development and support, we found that for smart contract development, which is function 1.1, and validator node infrastructure, which was RFP 1.2, that will be best served by a consortium of Layer 0 Labs Limited and Fireblocks Incorporated. Layer 0 could do the smart contract development and deployment for us. Fireblocks provides substantive infrastructure on the back end for the management of the token, the full life cycle of it. You can also see that Miston Labs and Bridge Ventures did score in smart contract development, as well as Ava Labs on the validator node infrastructure side. Moving on to RFP 2 for token distribution and support, we did have one qualified vendor for a centralized exchange, that is blockchain.com Incorporated. And then
A question before we
please.
move on that. It just is kind of like the philosophy that we're having. You know, we kind of thought that on the different blockchains, we'd probably, you know, move on to one and then put on several and have backup and capacities and stuff. Are the other different types of RFPs, are we going to consider that down the road when things get larger and we have would we bring on one of these other either smart contract or validator node at some point in time? You know, 2 years, 5 years, whatever the growth is, or just if they have, you know, something that goes wrong in our first pick, what's our backup? I guess I always like a plan B, so I guess I'm just asking you, what's our plan B on each one of these things?
Sure. So through the chair, Commissioner Meyer, great question, and it's one that you've asked actually early in my tenure, was how many of these do we need? So there's a few ways to respond to that question. One is, again, we do expect to have rolling qualifications, both for blockchain networks and for vendors. And I expect that we'll keep some of these people, actually it's in our procurement rules that we'll kind of keep these people.
Similar philosophy, you're always looking for a plan B as we need it. Okay,
Correct. And I think for us, it is even more so than perhaps most, because as we expand onto different blockchain networks, there's gonna be different providers that are better suited for different chains. What's interesting about Layer 0, and I'll talk a little bit more about them, is they can facilitate deployment across multiple chains, and I'll kind of wrap this memo with a bit more of a deeper discussion around
Is that
that.
the one that had like a capacity for 128 different chains?
Correct.
Okay, good.
Correct. So we'll talk more about that in a little bit, but for now, that's where we are with RFP 1.
Thank you.
So going into RFP 2 for token distribution and support, we had one centralized exchange that was qualified, blockchain.com. They did qualify for the remaining features and functions of this RFP, but in regards to the custodial wallet, the highest scoring respondent was Fireblocks Incorporated. For mobile applications and digital wallets, the highest scoring respondent was Ava Labs. For customer support, the highest scoring respondent was Fireblocks Inc. And in the marketing side, the highest scoring respondent was Ava Labs again. So once we get into the rest of these, it becomes a little more streamlined because the functions are consolidated. Either there was one or a client can serve all of them. So for RFP 3 for on-chain analytics, the evaluation committee scored highest Chainalysis Government Solutions. Second was TRM Labs, and third was Solidus Labs Incorporated. For reserves management, which again is a big bucket that includes investment management, custody of fiat, custody of treasuries, all the back office accounting, striking the daily NAV, and all that support that we would need. In terms of the evaluation committee, they found that Franklin Advisors, Inc., serving as the Benji Fund, again with the structure of multiple parties in one entity, scored highest. Second was the Northern Trust Company. And third was Securitized Markets LLC with the Bildel Fund in conjunction with BlackRock. RFP 5 for internal controls, evaluation committee scored highest Ernst & Young, followed by Deloitte & Touche, and then KPMG. For RFP 6, which is financial audit and attestation, the highest scoring firm was the network firm, followed by Grant Thornton. And for RFP 7, which is ecosystem intelligence, highest was Inca, followed by Solidus, and then Cube Security, Inc. And I go through all of those in order for reasons that will become self-evident in just a moment, but I will pause there if there's any questions on the results.
Are there questions? Questions? Commissioner Naves, if you have a question, you're a very small square on a screen a very long ways away.
No questions, Governor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Um,
One
Mr.
of the things
Kirschenbaum.
that I know we had discussed before is that sometimes you can't have a vendor in two or more because you have conflict of interest in different areas. So just looking at Ava on the mobile application and the marketing, any conflict of interest at all as far as them doing those two? It doesn't appear to be. I just wanted to double check.
So through the chair, and great question, Commissioner Meyer, that was specifically around internal controls in RFP 5 and financial audit and attestation in RFP 6. That's because essentially if you were doing the internal controls, you're on the advisory side of a Big Four firm. If you're doing the financial audit and attestation, you're on the audit side. And that's
guess
the
if
segregation of duties,
If
yeah.
anybody got kicked off because there's a conflict in one thing or another, just let us know.
No, there was, through the chair, there was one scenario where one team wanted to apply for both. They recused themselves from one and applied in the other before they even sent two proposals in. So we avoided that wholeheartedly.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the results?
Questions? There are none.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Proceed. So I've added a couple of just quotes in here from some of the documentation and rules we have in place. From the procurement rules and the RFP itself, from Chapter 2, Section 11, this walks through the ability of the director or their designee to begin the negotiation processes once approved to do so by the commission. So that would be my directive, to begin those conversations as soon as possible. We want to continue being on an aggressive timeline here. We received extremely robust RFPs when it comes to the detail of what can be provided at what costs, and we'll start there. And then I wanted to be clear about what's in item C. The reason why we ranked these and presented that is because if I, in my negotiations, cannot consummate an engagement with vendor number 1, we move to vendor number 2. So I wanted to call this out specifically because I want the commission to be aware that there's a level of comfort with all of these names that are on here. And if we can't, again, consummate those negotiations, we would move through the list fairly expeditiously. We know what our budget is, we know what our costs are, we know what we need. We have a tremendous amount of knowledge after going through all of these RFPs and seeing all of them. So this is a method for us to really get the best deal possible for the state of Wyoming and also continue a brisk cadence as we move through this process. The next item on here is from Chapter 4 of our procurement rules, which is on the award. Really, this just walks through the steps of how the award and the contract would be executed and the steps that go into doing that. So negotiation, followed by the Attorney General's office essentially helping generate or reviewing the contract, depending on how and kind of whose remit that's in. But again, I will specify, we do expect all these contracts will be signed on Wyoming paper. We did specify that with vendors on the way in. We asked them to sign a MOU acknowledgement that said we've read the rules, we've read a template Wyoming state contracts, we know what to expect. And again, that should help us keep things brisk.
Just a question about the contract itself. I'm just wondering, have you developed the language to make everybody, I guess, all these cats in this different RFPs, some kind of a contract term that says that you're all gonna work together, and what's the penalty if they don't?
So through the chair, another good question. So we haven't customized wording that would include that. I would expect that to not be in the contract proper, like the template contract that we have. It would be in a scope of work attachment to it.
Maybe a side letter or something?
Yes, and I will be specific there. There are already, even beyond the groups that kind of got that first position, generally speaking, this industry is still in its infancy. So a lot of these teams do work with each other already. And then I think it would not be difficult to, everyone's aware of how they would need to support each other, especially when we start talking about taking processes that are manual and let's say the finance side and putting them into an API format to be digested by the tech side. These are all the conversations we've been having along the way as part of the interview process.
It might be, I guess, maybe think about putting something in there, asking them the affirmative, do you know, to attest that they have no problems working with any of these people in any way, and something in there that maybe would hold them to a standard of, I guess, whatever standard that would kind of keep them working that way.
Through the chair, again, another good point. You know, when we start drafting this from our side, there may be maybe in the same vein, we want to add, for example, commitment to joining a project meeting once a week for an hour to get everyone, because all of these teams, we did ask them for the RFPs to essentially a point person. So having those point people on a call to make sure they're all working together seamlessly as needed for us, yeah, that's definitely feasible.
I know, Mr. Chairman, that, on the SLIB board, we have an investment policy statement. I don't know if an operational policy statement would be appropriate that they all agree to. Or, something just to know that just let everybody know what the playing field is, what the rules are and what we expect, so.
And I'd leave that for the commission to consider.
Mr. Chairman, I think everything works good until it doesn't, and then just so they know that, and maybe that's not necessarily right off, I don't know, but I think at some point in time, with as many vendors and as many personalities are you gonna have, and as much, competitive nature in this industry, you sure want everybody to be held to some kind of a standard of care.
Sure. Commissioner Pope.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would expect that in the internal controls engagement, we will address that with the vendor that we ultimately contract with, and that would be a part of a robust system of internal controls, is to make sure that we have operational control over the vendors and their relationships with each other too.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Sure you'll be able to handle it then.
Oh, hopefully not me.
Hopefully not me either.
So just through the chair, one more thing I'd like to add from this section here is for each, when we drafted the request for proposals, and this is language that we did lift and shift directly from that A&I template, the commission reserves right to reject any and all proposals, to waive any informality or technical defect in the proposals, or to award the contract in whole or in part if deemed to be in the best interest of the state to do so. The commission will award the contract to the firm determined to have the most responsive and responsible proposal. So really what that says is there's a little bit of flexibility to fit the jigsaw pieces together if we need to sand off an edge or two. Again, I think we've got strong confidence with the proposals we've seen, the interviews we've had, that won't really be an issue. And again, we've part of the reason why we did 7 concurrent RFPs was so that everyone kind of had their own lane to stay in and we knew what we were going to get out of the build. So I don't think we'll need to leverage that, but again, I just want to bring that forward in case we do need to, we start getting into negotiations and things go a different direction, which is always a possibility.
Okay.
Moving on to the last page here, I have another section on blockchain selection. So we do have our 9 candidate blockchains to start, but with layer 0, because of the way they are structured, they can deploy tokens on about 120 or more blockchains pretty much instantaneously. I will specify, we didn't choose them because of interoperability. They did register as a smart contract developer. That is how we went through the RFQ and RFP process with them. They've also got some really interesting features of their, what they call the omni-chain fungible token. It's a proprietary tool called Color Trace. It does things like yield attribution can be embedded into it. It can also be used as a compliance tool for tracking where tokens are, whether that's, into decentralized finance pools or whether that is in, going to wallets we don't want things to go to. That's metadata that's generated through this architecture. That can be very interesting for us. But all of this to say, while we still have those 9 candidate blockchains in place, I personally would not recommend committing to a specific blockchain at this time. I think we've got some flexibility to get under contract with these parties and just to test what works best for us without having to make a determination now before we're even under one of these contracts. I think we've got a little bit more time and we can get a little bit more testing done to see if a specific blockchain, their features works best for us, whether that's based on fees, efficiency, compliance controls, what have you. We've got a little bit of breathing room there for the time being. So when we get down to the director's recommendation, there's nothing here particular to a blockchain network. The recommendation would be to authorize myself or the designee to enter into negotiations with the qualified vendors as recommended by the respective evaluation committees for RFPs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And then I would also recommend authorization of the executive director and chief information security officer to issue unbacked, i.e. non-reserved, test tokens on blockchain testnets without formal approval or multi-signature processes. So what I'm trying to say there is if we are going to be focused on testing, we may be doing a lot of this between myself and Keith and others kind of in the remit, but I just want to start with those 2 titles. These are, again, test tokens that are unbacked on testnets. There's no financial incentive to any of this. There's no money moving around. This is just playing around with the demo functionally. It's not something that we are prohibited from doing, but it's also not something that we are enumerated to do. I want to be very clear that this is something that will likely happen over the course of the next month before we have our next commission meeting, should we be able to promulgate some of these contracts.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Treasurer.
I would hope that we could, maybe concurrently work on use cases and marketing. So, we get to a situation where, you might have the perfect blockchain and everything that you want, but the use cases and marketing don't coincide or blend with it or whatever. So to the extent that those 2 things can give some information into your process of what you're doing, I think would be appropriate. I'm not sure where we're at, Mr. Chairman, on marketing or use cases at this time, because I know that you've really dove in to what's on your plate, and glad for that. But now I think as we move through the next thing, we need to bring the other things in.
Sure.
I would agree and say that I think a lot of the marketing and use cases, while we have a general idea of how we can roll this out, a lot of that may be downstream of which chain we launch on as well. So there are things that are perhaps more natural fits, and we could kind of spec towards that. The other thing I would say about being open here is that we give us potential to work with some of the foundations that oversee these networks. Perhaps they want to get involved. Perhaps they don't want to fund us. That's not a relationship we would have, but they wanted to help circulate Wyoming stable tokens amongst the different programs that they're building internally. That is how typically a lot of these, typically their structure is non-for-profits. Typically they're the ones that do the issuance of a token for a given network. We could certainly start talking with some of those groups, and I think we'll be talking more about that in just a minute when we talk about the blockchain assessment update on our side. But all that say, that's well taken, and I think marketing is a ramp up, right? We talked about it early on before we really had even an inkling of how we were going to structure this thing, and now that we're talking about who we're going to be contracting at cost and how we're going to be deploying it, I think we've started turning the heat up on that. I think that'll become more of a topic for us as we move forward in the coming months and weeks.
Good, that's the fun part.
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Pope.
Director, just want to touch briefly on the technical side of the test tokens. Just want to make sure that when they are issued, that we will have the ability then, when that cycle is completed, to get proof of burn or proof of removal of those from the system so that there can be no illicit use of those, or that may not technically even be necessary? I'd like a little better explanation of that.
Through the chair, Commissioner Pope, I don't believe that would be necessary. Of course, on some networks that is something you can do. On Ethereum, you'd send it what's called the 0x0 address, where it becomes unrecoverable. That is typically one way you could burn things. If we are at a point where we're testing out, our own ability to do a burn as part of a redemption, right? That's another thing you can kind of prove. But from my perspective, it is somewhat of an unnecessary step because these are things that are valueless, intentionally so, right? So if they end up in some nefarious actors' hands, it's not like there's any value to it, nothing they could do with it besides test their own platforms.
Mr. Chairman?
Please, Commissioner Pope.
Thank you. Okay, so let's say it ends up, a valueless one ends up in my wallet and I do a direct wallet-to-wallet transfer with someone else. Is that and maybe this is just me showing a little bit of ignorance on the technical side. Is that something that can be used in a fraud situation? Someone claiming that they own WIST and then transferring direct wallet to wallet. Is that something that we should be concerned about, or something that's even possible?
So through the chair, Commissioner Pope, and I would certainly, if my response is not eloquent, I would certainly invite Keith or Flavia to tag in here, but I wouldn't have that concern. I mean, if you talk about fraud, I mean, if we're being as broad as possible, if you were to try to pull the wool over someone's eyes and say, I sent you, Ethereum, and now you have it in your wallet, so give me $2,500 cash here right now, and I send you a token, it's not on the Ethereum mainnet, it's on the Goerli testnet, or the Sepiola one is the one they have now. I guess, but I think we're pretty far down the rabbit hole with that kind of use case. I mean, these are intentionally test networks. They're named as such. They're labeled as such natively, typically in wallets. And when you're transacting on a mainnet, you're transacting on a mainnet. It's always going to be the mainnet, as opposed to various different test networks that are set up for different purposes and testing parameters.
Thank you. I think that answers my question.
Thank you, Commissioner Pope. Further, Commissioner Wallace.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make sure I understand this whole process. So you are going to enter into negotiating. When would you expect to actually sign any contracts then? Or how would that approval process, or am I jumping the gun here?
Through the chair, Commissioner Wallace, I think that's right where we are, right? The goal is to move extremely quickly here. And that is how the rules have been structured, how the process has been structured to give the executive director the authority to enter into those contracts, so we don't need to wait a month to come back and say, okay, well, here's what we got now. Do I have approval to put my own signature on something? So again, we've done as much as we can along the way to prime these candidates to make sure that we were ready to move as quickly as possible. Again, template Wyoming contracts, they understand they're signing on state paper, they understand the insurance needs that we have, they understand that our sovereignty does not extend to them. And there is a carve out in the Wyoming state contracts, I think it's called general provisions, that may not be correct, but there is essentially a section of Wyoming contracts where counterparties can recommend their own terms as long as they don't contravene them in the existing contracts. And we did ask for those up front. We asked for any diligence that a counterparty would need on us, which is typically just background on myself. We've primed all of that to make sure this process moves as fast as possible.
And then kind of a follow-up on that, as far as, with you've got the budget numbers now and that sort of thing. Have you attempted to put those numbers into like a pro forma budget and make sure we have the money to pay these guys?
Through the chair, Commissioner Wallace, we have. Joe and Keith have done a really exceptional job of putting together all along the way financial models of how this all works out, whether that was based on the permutations of who we're engaging, the permutations of what features we're going to engage, because things do come in kind of a la carte through some of these processes. I will note that they did all of that work before we went into the oral interviews on the proposals that were delivered. So they were kind of agnostic. And then that really gives opportunity to press on price during some of the interviews for what was being offered at what cost. I am happy to say we would come in under budget. It's still not a very large budget, but we've done the math and it would bear out that we would be A-okay with the budget we currently have to engage the partners we're talking about with all the features that we need.
Thank you. Commissioner Pope.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, so it looks to me under your recommendation, you're looking for us to delegate authority to you to enter into the negotiations. Would they eventually be approved by us, or would you be looking for a delegation to sign the final agreements? And then I'll have a follow-up after that.
Through the chair, Commissioner Pope, to be clear, as the executive director, I already have that authority as part of the rule set. So again, that was meant, so the reason we were having these conversations in this forum is to make sure everyone's comfortable with the direction forward. So all I need to do is make sure we get the numbers and the processes right and we can sign. Otherwise, we're waiting. Let's say we miss, we're trying to put this all together simultaneously. Let's say we miss one vendor on the March 20th meeting. Now we're waiting till late April to sign one or two contracts. That's not where we want to be. So the ask here is not to enumerate my powers to enter into the contract. The ask here is to, and again, I hope I wrote this straightforward enough, but really what we're trying to do is enter into negotiations with the qualified vendors as recommended by the evaluation committee. So this is more of an assent of the ranking than my authority to go and sign the contract.
Thank you. Follow-up question then. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think all of that sounds great. We are really just approving the list then right now. My question is then, is there any limit to the delegation that we want to make? Because I believe we chose the best vendors. I think you chose the best vendors to be on this list. I agree. I was surprised by the cost of some of the services. And so my concern is that if we are delegating up to the limit of what they have bid, I would be concerned for our budget in that. And I would like that to be on the record that I am encouraging negotiation. So that is my final thought on that. Otherwise, both of these recommendations I am absolutely good with, because I think the process was robust and I think you guys did a wonderful job. So thank you.
Director.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Commissioner Pope, and thank you as well. A couple of quick notes. So I had the great pleasure of getting to review the thousands of pages of proposals and not scoring any of them. That was left to our evaluation committees. So that is something that I was independent from, because I've been speaking with these parties kind of along the way through even the RFIs back in November of 2023. Right, so that was kind of an independence thing from my perspective, and that gives me another opportunity, really, now that we're at the end of this document, to give another round of thanks to everyone who participated in this process. It was a lot of hours to review the materials. It was a lot of hours of interviews. So to the commissioners, SMAs, and agency team members who went through all of this, again, my very sincere thanks for all the time that was put in. I think for some people this became a full-time day job on top of a full-time day job. So I just wanted to make sure we said my piece on that. Second thing is, Commissioner Pope, in regards to some of these costs, yes, some of them were high. Again, we took a conservative look when it came to making sure we didn't hit the upper band of the budget. I think I perhaps share that concern with you, but that is, again, one of the reasons why we've structured this negotiation process to be fairly robust. If we cannot, again, consummate a engagement with one party, we can move to the next, and perhaps cost is a fairly large driver of that. So I will be on the record myself saying that.
Okay. Further comments? If there are none, what is What is the pleasure?
I would move to almost directly use almost directly the language that Director Apollo recommends on item 1, page 5 of the RFP, what is it, the request for proposal vendor recommendation memo, which states authorize the executive director or his designee to enter into negotiations with qualified vendors as recommended by the respective evaluation committees for RFPs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And then I think we, since item number 2 is a completely separate issue, I think we deal with that separately. So that would be my motion.
Director Rex on 1? So the motion is to move Directors Rex on item 1.
That's exactly it. Yes,
Okay, I
Treasurer.
will second that, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, that motion has been made by Commissioner Polk, seconded by Commissioner Meyer. Is there any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Nays? Abstentions? That motion carries. Commissioner Pope.
Okay, so on item number 2, authorize the Executive Director and Chief Information Security Officer to issue unbacked test tokens on blockchain test nets without formal approval or multi-signature processes. I would move Director's recommendation on that based on his answers to my previous questions.
Noting the record and the answers, Commissioner Pope, that is in order. Is there support for the Commissioner Pope's motion? Second. It's been seconded by Auditor Commissioner Racine, sorry. Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Nays? Abstentions? That motion carries too.
Thank you,
Very good.
Mr. Chairman.
That's good.
We're off to the races.
All right.
Time to build. So with the request for proposal vendor recommendation memo out of the way, we've got one more on the docket for this morning. This is the candidate blockchain assessment update memo. And this is going to dovetail a bit off the conversation we had about 2 weeks ago, just to make sure that the agency team is moving things along at a desired cadence for the commission and the stated goals of this effort. So to take you through what we will be speaking about, reviewing and approving a process and timeline for updating blockchain selection criteria for candidate blockchains on which Wyoming stable tokens may be launched, inclusive of potential operational revisions to dissemination of information put forth in a special meeting held on February 14th of 2025. And of course, the alternative here is we could just keep things the way they are. But just to kind of summarize the background here, what's on the bottom of page 1, everyone is already well familiar with. We did a assessment through a blockchain selection working group staffed by commission members, agency members, SMAs, looking at 20 different blockchains, 25 different objective criteria, scoring them and selecting 9 candidate chains that were then brought forward into the formal RFQ and RFP process. Flipping over to page 2. We did, at our meeting in December, vote to add a new chapter to the procurement rules ahead of the regular rulemaking submission, which is the ongoing submission of statements of qualification. That again is what we refer to colloquially as the rolling qualifications for both vendors and blockchain networks. So this is how we make sure we keep expanding the pool over time. And for blockchain networks specifically, the language in section 3A, Romanet 1, says the commission shall develop, adapt, maintain an approved list of candidate blockchains that Wyoming stable token may launch on based on criteria adopted by the commission, and Romanet 2, develop and administer a review portal on the agency website that publicizes the assessment of blockchains. I will reiterate, we've certainly had our blockchain assessment up on our website since we brought it forward. So we had a special meeting on February 14th And we had some dialogue around how to communicate these new criteria to some of these other networks who may be interested in joining our efforts along the way, and looking to the team to be more proactive in accommodating that. Motions were made, there was two of them. One was to prohibit any changes being made to the blockchain scoring system for the first planned quarterly review, anticipated to occur in April of 2025, and then require notification for interested parties to be sent via certified mail. So we took that back as a team, had a discussion on it, and had a few thoughts we wanted to share. And again, this is opinions from our side, we just want to communicate. One is in regards to updating criteria. The sentiment on our side is we should avail ourselves of that potentiality. I certainly don't think we should be refitting the entire selection process and redoing all of the criteria. A tremendous amount of work and time and thought went into those, and I'm very comfortable with where they are. That being said, this is an industry that moves exceptionally fast, and that's one of the reasons why we're doing this exercise, because some networks may have new features along the way that would bring them into scope for us. So one of the things that we would propose is permitting some amendments or changes or updates to those scoring criteria. And for one that I think highlights the speed at which this industry moves, one of the things that was suggested internally as an ad was emerging market trends and seeing, you know, which chains we're seeing adopt use cases around things like AI or distributed physical infrastructure, via virtual reality or in-game assets, and just some, again, draft language around what those additional points may look like in the scoring rubric. So that was one thing we talked about internally. Second would be a schedule. We want to make sure that we're delivering for the commission along the way. So when we talked about an April 2025 refresh, and we know that there's a couple of steps required to accomplish this, we wanted to put them down on paper and make sure the commission was comfortable with such a cadence. So the thought would be, in our meeting today, to review and approve the request for information and consideration form, which is, we'll go through in a moment, and you have in front of you. We would upload that form to the commission website via Notion, where we already do things like email collection. We've done this kind of capture before. And then we'd also notice the form via social media and email distribution. And that's really to get registrations out for people who are interested in this. Next up, at the next monthly meeting at March, we would look to share any of the updated blockchain selection criteria, if there are any, at that point in time. And then I would look to distribute those to the interested parties that have registered through this registration form. Between March and our April meeting, that's when we would really do the exercise again of applying all of our criteria to the chains that we're looking at. Essentially a refresh of the exercise that was done some months ago. And we could hold an open dialogue with the dev teams during that time. And then on April 17th, we could, again, kind of re-announce, re-rank the networks that we're looking at. And that's the cadence we've kind of thought about at a high level. Final piece here is red receipts. So one of the motions at the end of the prior meeting was to send certified mail to these parties that have expressed interest. And that could be prohibitively difficult. And Mr. Chairman, I think you mentioned this as well in your feedback at that point in time, which was, you know, if we get 1,000 requests, that becomes someone's full-time job and a bit of a financial hurdle for the agency as well. When you layer in some of the difficulties around, or some of the structure of decentralized networks on top of that, we're talking about perhaps decentralized autonomous agencies. We do in the state have the ability to register DAOs as an LLC structure. Those can have thousands of people within the context of one interested entity. Further, these are people, maybe we don't know where they live, they don't want to be found. Maybe these are people who are overseas. So getting certified mail out at scale on a global method may break in a couple of key ways. Conversely, I think the solution here is quite simple. If we register people with email addresses, we can have functionally read receipts on emails. The technology that sounds a little more ominous is, but tracking pixels to see when people open messages. These are other much more lightweight ways that are kind of infinitely scalable, and I think would work better for the intent here, which is to make sure that when we're putting our own criteria forward, people find out about it quite quickly. So,
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Myers?
Yeah, I had thought that when we were discussed the certified mail, we said or electronically in that. And this was already taken care of, and now you're saying it's not taken care of.
Through the chair, Commissioner Meyer, after rewatching the video for the
Didn't say
minutes,
that.
I did not get the sense or hear
So
explicitly.
just saying, I would guess I'd say electronically in a uniform manner. So, you know, everybody's on the same page. Is that appropriate?
Through the chair, Commissioner Meyer, however, we make sure that it's overt that it is electronic distribution, certified, email, whatever you want to call it, as long as we're all on the same page, that is the methodology that we can use.
And Director and Commissioner Meyer, I believe that was an issue that I raised. Making sure, because I think there's so many ways that people receive messages now. I do think it's important that, you know, some sort of return receipt mechanism be in place regardless of platform.
So, I guess I'd just say, Mr. Chairman, that, is that motion number 2, one motion to amend previous motion that required certified mail? I guess I would move, Mr. Chairman, that we add on there, or an electronic, methodology which accomplishes a acknowledgement of the communication. Is that broad enough?
Director.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Meyer, if the question is to me, I think that's sufficiently broad.
Okay, all right. I would make that motion, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, motion's been made. Is there support for the Commissioner Myers' motion?
Second.
It's been seconded by Commissioner Pope. Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Nays? That motion carries.
Mr. Chairman, I've got a little bit of question about that number 1 motion, and that's the updating the blockchain selection criteria for the initial quarterly refresh exercise. That's going to be April 1. That's the first quarter. I'm just, you know, I think there was some concern that I had that all the information would get to everyone in the same manner and form, and that everybody had that. And that the other thing I have a concern on is to make sure that the due diligence in these things are essentially first party. We're not looking at you know, headlines on the Wall Street Journal or some podcast or something to make determination about information of the capacity of the people that we're looking at.
Sure. So to the chair, Commissioner Meyer, a couple things in there. Again, the April date was spoken about somewhat agnostically, you know, April 1 for a quarterly refresh. What I'm trying to get across with this schedule here is exactly how we get there, right? So if we wanted an April 17 full announcement of who's where at our monthly meeting at that point in time, we could back into it from where we are now. And that's what we've aligned here. And happy to take any feedback on that, but that was the thrust that we were trying to do.
Yeah,
Second thing,
Mr. Chairman, I thought we were backing into it the last time we had this conversation several weeks ago, and that April 1 was what we're going to be able to do. I just, if you're going to change it, and I think one of the reasons why we said we didn't want to change anything in the first one was because it was going to be hard to get information out and to let everybody know what it was, and for them to basically prepare their blockchain to be able to compete. Or, you know, that's, and I think I still have that concern. I definitely agree with you 1,000% that this industry is changing, the capacities and needs are changing. But if we're going to have a transparent mechanism, we're going to have the information that we expect to be changed, you know, at least a month before the date people are going to apply. Maybe that's not right. Maybe it's 3 hours before they apply, you know? But I think that there needs to be, I guess, in a reasonableness factor, maybe it's 2 weeks. I don't know. I guess I'd ask people what they think their thought is as far as making sure the process is, and maybe there's some change that is just so critical that, yeah, you have to get it out there and you have to get somebody thinking about it. So I'm a little bit concerned about being transparent versus getting the best, the latest, and the greatest, you know, teed up. And if you're doing it quarterly, do you have time to wait 3 months before you get the latest and greatest? And then the latest and greatest is going to change by the time then the end of the 3 months.
Mr.
So,
Chairman?
Commissioner Pope, go ahead.
My apologies. So one of my concerns is the workload of your department, and in trying to get a release. And I think that was one of my thoughts in not making any huge changes right now. I see that this process has to be eventually ongoing and rotational, and we have to be able to add and subtract and have open lines of communications with all of these candidates, and possibly even when we're in the middle of a refresh, something new happens and we have to get feedback from those candidates almost immediately. So I can see your need for your first recommendation, recommended motion. I can understand that, but I can also understand that you guys are perpetually right now understaffed, and there is a workload consideration as well. So I'm looking for feedback from you on kind of all of these issues and how we deal with those.
Yep. I'd be, Mr. Chairman, fine for the second quarterly refresh exercise, but I think Commissioner Pope makes a great observation that you've got so many irons in the fire now. If you want to, you know, redesign the airplane as it's flying and you're building it, you know, right now, probably not, but, you know, by July 1, maybe you got the capacity to actually do that. But if there's one specific thing that you think has to absolutely be in the initial quarterly thing, I'd like to, you know, have an idea what it is and see whether or not it's something that you can basically sell. That, yeah, let's tee up this other thing and get vendors, and 6 months later we'll have them hired.
Commissioner Meyer and Commissioner Pope, I'm sort of struggling to try to find a reasonable balance here. And you know, I'm unclear whether things are advancing so rapidly that, you know, it requires, I guess I'm thinking your suggestion, Commissioner, is somewhere between sort of monthly and then having a 2-week period prior so that people would be open to adding to it. Is that?
Yeah, well, Mr. Chairman, I'm looking at it right now and I'm saying, you know, even the 17th, that's not that far away of April. And we've got all these other irons in the fire. We're putting on 7 different RFPs, doing all of the contracts. I don't think there's time to actually look at changing something for the 17th of April. I certainly think that there may be enough bandwidth within everything to do it, you know, on July. And we had talked about let's just, for all the reasons that we said no changes on the initial one, is just stay the course. And then if you're going to change things, and do it on the July one, which would be the 17th of July. And by that time, I think it's appropriate maybe to, if there's some changes that we want to look at, you know, to inform the community that, yeah, on the 17th of July, these are some of the things that we'll probably add to the mix.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Pope.
I also struggle in a number of ways with this, in that I feel somewhat responsible for this entire product, and I shouldn't. I tend to micromanage in a lot of ways where I shouldn't. And so my question is, are we micromanaging this process by saying that Director Apollo can or can't amend his process as necessary in order to select the best blockchains for presentation to us? So I'm, you know, while I have concerns about workload right now and trying to get the best product out the door. My other question is whether then coming in and saying that these couple of additional points and changes that Director Apollo wants to make, is this micromanaging on our part to say that he can't make it? So I don't, you know, as long as our basic structure is in place where there's adequate notification, there's adequate time for response, I don't know that I want to step in and say that he can't make minor changes to that, to his selection process. So those are my thoughts on it. I go both sides of it, and so I think that for me, I'd like to hear others' thoughts on it, because I don't know what, you know, I want to step in and say, Director Apollo, you should do this, but then is that appropriate for me to do? And I don't think it is.
I guess, Mr. Chairman, I think Commissioner Pope makes a good point there, from the standpoint that if they think they got the capacity and they can do this and still do everything else, and the RFPs and stuff aren't going to fall behind, and they can actually get everybody informed and be transparent in a proper manner, go ahead and make the changes. But if not, then, you know, let's be cognizant of I guess, our capacities.
Okay. Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A few things I would quickly say in response, and I certainly appreciate the concern around just the amount that's in front of the team, because there is quite a bit. A couple of things I would mention. First is, what I'm trying to do, not to do here, is create any kind of tectonic changes, right? But adding the ability to add one or two more criteria, if it makes sense for us to do so, is something I don't want to be prohibited from. Again, we've had in recent times the proliferation of new use cases that we want to be tracking. On the converse side, there's new types of hacks that we've never seen before that we need to think about, and being able to put those into a quarterly flow is going to have a material impact on scores to make it more accurate and reflective. The second thing I would say is, because we're not looking to move heaven and earth to do this exercise from scratch again, we can, I believe, do it with the facilities that we have, especially as we're now going to be paying and contracting people to build on our behalf. Yes, we have to monitor them. Yes, there needs to be oversight. I'm looking forward to that and getting things moving, but there will be other people building things on our behalf. And the other thing I want to mention is, we put so much effort in the first time around to make sure everything we said was cited and sourced. So for a large swath of the work we would do in a kind of refresh like this, it's literally clicking on a link we've already put there and putting in a new number. I'd also add one last nuance on the scope. We're not going to be starting with 30 blockchains every time either, right? We already have some that got through the binaries, they're candidate blockchains. There are some that did not get through those binaries the first time around, now probably would. And then there's some that didn't get through the binaries. They're still not going to get through their binaries. They're probably never going to get through the binaries. So we're not talking about refreshing all this information for 30 chains. We're talking about 4 or 5 per quarter, and perhaps just adding an information refresh with data we've already put there and pulling in a couple of new sources potentially. So that's what I wanted to say about the kind of the scope and the scale. Second thing I want to mention is we did create, in this cadence, the ability between, let's say, March and April to have weeks, almost a month of dialogue with development teams. Commissioner Meyer, as you said, first-party sources, right? So I would look forward to having those conversations. We should be having those conversations. Audit rules apply, trust but verify. If you recall the last time around that we did this exercise, there were some blockchains that even though they did score high and get into the candidate list, when they sent us some data back and said, hey, you should think about scoring us in this way, we said no, because these were users on a test net instead of a main net, for example. And I want to make sure that we have that open dialogue with the dev teams, but also are able to verify things independently. And then finally, in terms of the criteria, just making sure that teams aren't managing around those criteria. I will kind of always reiterate here that we're looking for existing and demonstrable technology. So to the extent that people have that, excellent. What we don't want to have happen is people building just around, oh, well, we could build this thing over here as a test, and then they don't deploy it to a mainnet. They do it, deploy to mainnet, it breaks. We as the state of Wyoming are going to need to have things that are battle tested. And I stand by that personally. So that's my perspective here. I'm hoping that this month of buffer to have dialogue with the teams helps move us forward in the capacity that you're talking about. Because now that we've got, a V1 scope in front of us, hopefully we've got a little bit more breathing room to bring the rest of it together.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Pope.
I'd like to move the director's recommendation number 1, and the main reason is that I believe that Director Apollo needs to be given a certain amount of freedom to design this in the best way possible with our oversight. And I don't see any reason whatsoever that that he should not be allowed, and his team should not be allowed to update the selection criteria as long as he follows the notification procedures that we've already requested, and he believes that he has the bandwidth to do so within his organization. I think we have vested with him the necessity to create the best token in the broadest range of blockchains for broadest acceptance possible. I don't see any reason why the minor changes to the scoring and to the selection process shouldn't be within his purview. I would like to make that motion and allow him to update the blockchain selection criteria even in this initial quarterly refresh exercise. If he's asking for that, I don't see personally a reason we should say no.
All right. Thank you. It's a motion. Is there support for the motion?
Mr. Chairman, I would second and wonder if it would be friendly to maybe add on to that. And my inclination is that the director would inform us anyway, but just a notification at the next meeting if any substantial changes are made, just so we have awareness, since we all know this has become a sensitive issue. And so if there's, other than correcting grammatical errors, that at least we kind of know after the fact what any changes have been.
Mr. Chairman, I would view that as not only friendly, but probably necessary.
Commissioner Pope, Thank you. Commissioner Racines, thank you. Moved and seconded. Yeah. Director Apollo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for, again, the feedback. I do want to be clear that part of the reason why we're going through this path of having kind of checkpoints around commission meetings is because in the Chapter 6 of the procurement rules around these rolling qualifications, we do say that the criteria have to be adopted by the commission. So it's, what I'm referring to is not necessarily myself or the team slotting some things in of our own volition. We just want the ability to be able to come to the table and say, this is what we think should be inclusive in this exercise, and have the commission ratify that decision.
Mr. Chairman, and another point of discussion then, since you are updating the criteria, will you need a separate motion to adopt that additional criteria, since you just brought up that it's in the procurement rules?
Through the chair, Commissioner Pope, if I understand the question correctly, I mean, my read of this is we're looking at blockchains based on criteria adopted by the commission. To me, that means the commission. Now, if that's something that the commission wants to delegate, I don't have a strong opinion on that. I just want to make sure that we're, as these rules are coming into fruition, we are abiding by them.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, may I kind of clarify my question?
Yep.
Under next steps, you have updated criteria as one of the headings. And under your rules that you just cited, you said that we have to approve the criteria. So that's all my question is whether or not you need a motion to approve the updated criteria that you have here. Because if so, then we can look at that motion separately, I think.
Through the, just a clarification through the
Yeah,
chair, you're asking about the specific criteria that's written here, or are we talking about that as an example?
I take this memo to show that that you, or to explain that it looks like you want to update the criteria, which I don't have any problems with, but your thought was that the commission itself has to approve the criteria. So my question is, do we need a separate motion for that, for this particular update in the criteria?
Through the chair, Commissioner Pope, apologies for being a little obtuse, but so my main concern was coming out of the last discussion with a prohibition on any adjustments to the criteria before the magical date of April 1st, right? So whether it's our team doing it, whether it's the commission helping, I think having a cadence with this particularly helps, because the treasurer's point, putting expectations down and a roadmap down, I think will be supportive of what we're trying to do. Again, whether it's the team doing things specifically or the commission adopting it by a vote, I don't have an opinion on that. What I don't want to have happen is get to a meeting where we could be approving things and still run into a prohibition of changing criteria. That's my concern. And I hope that was a bit more eloquent than probably a former response.
Well, and I'm probably the one that was misunderstanding. If that section was just an example of what may happen, then I don't think we need to do anything. If that's an actual recommendation on a change, then I think we may need to. I think you answered perfectly, and I don't know that we need to address that separately. So I'm fine with my original motion with Auditor Racina's addition to it.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Meyer.
if we, the updated criteria, I'm fine with voting for that and approving it today. And that would actually, if we are gonna approve this criteria today, I think that's a reasonable thing to do, is to change that for the initial quarterly one. I think that's, emerging markets, I think that's a place where we're actually gonna have to have some bandwidth.
Kurt, I apologize. I can barely hear you. I think the microphone is too
sorry.
far
I'm
away.
just-
I'm so sorry.
relaxing in my easy chair here, and I'm away from.
Yeah,
you know,
thank
so,
you.
Yeah, So I'm just saying, Flavia, that, you know, I'm willing to just go ahead and adopt that emerging market trends criteria and point scoring that's here that says next steps, updated criteria, and approve the initial quarterly refresh exercise, having that, allowing to change that and update that. It gives me a little bit more, I guess, a warm and fuzzy feeling if we have to approve anything that's going in there. And I think this is early enough that any blockchain can actually prepare for the April 17th meeting. I was just concerned that you guys were gonna say, okay, well, it's April 10th and here's the new meeting, and somebody's on a vacation and they don't see it and they just get, you know, it gets kind of messy when you just have a few days notice. I think this is plenty of time for people to adjust to this particular process that's in the updated criteria. So I guess that's where I'm at, Mr. Chairman. I'd call for the question.
Okay, we're back on the original motion. It's been moved by Commissioner Pope, seconded by Commissioner Racines, fully discussed. One more call. Any other comments, discussions, questions been called for? All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Nays?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman,
You're a nay?
no, I'm an aye.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just say, even though there's not a particular recommendation at this time, I just would, I guess, query the director as to whether or not it would, he'd be all right with us basically approving the updated criteria under next steps at this time, just so people have basically a chance to move on.
I think we've been pretty straightforward. Do you feel, Director or other commissioners, that that's been properly in front of the public generally to do that at this point?
Mr. Chairman, just to clarify the question, you're talking about specific criteria?
Yeah.
So since we went through the initial exercise, those criteria have been on our website the entire time. So, and that's another reason why, you know, trying not to go backwards, but if people want to know what our criteria are now, they've been there since October, September.
Sure.
So they're certainly there. In regards to this particular question under updated criteria, this is just meant as an example. You know, it was kind of put together. It looks quite nice, but we may want to, rather than trying to approve this one specifically through a motion, we may want to add a definition, a fourth thing in here. So again, I don't want to necessarily commit to this very second. This is again meant as simply an example, but an example of how fast this industry moves and why we want to consider things like this along the way.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Meyer.
I guess I'm confused now that we've had criteria on there since October, but, and this was on there, but it was never part of the scoring matrix and what other things, so we're not part of it that we've had on it since October?
Through the chair,
Director.
Commissioner Meyer, this criteria specifically on emerging market trends was simply created as an example for this memo. This is not something that's in the scoring.
What was on, I'm confused now, really confused about what was on our website since October.
That's, if you look back at the earlier paragraph here, that's the 25 objective criteria that was applied across 28 blockchains. That's the scoring methodology is there, the rubric is there, the links are.
But this one wasn't.
Just that particular one under next steps about the emerging tech was not.
Okay.
This was drafted as an example of something, a rationale as to why we may want to push for the ability to create new criteria rather than have a base prohibition precluding us from creating more criteria.
I give up.
Mr. Chairman
Commissioner Pope.
and Director Apollo, I apologize. Initially, I had the wrong impression of this as well. I thought it was something that you were going to add. I look at this as kind of like when I create a scenario for my clients that is an example scenario of what they could do, but I don't necessarily have it fully fleshed out at the time I present it to them. It's just an idea of something that could happen. So I had not considered that originally, so I apologize. I believe I get it now, so.
So what's the pleasure then of the board? Have we,
Well, I'm not going to do anything with it, Mr. Chairman.
okay?
I'm not looking at following any action.
Okay. All right. For the record, we'll change an aye to an O from the treasurer. Thank you. Director Apollo, is there any more conversation on this?
Mr. Chairman, not particularly. I'll just note that you have a blockchain scoring request for information consideration document in front of you. This is simply a form that Steph has already worked to put together. So we've had this conversation 2 weeks ago. We had this conversation today. We are happy to get started collecting that information from foundations, developers, builders. That way we know who to reach out to and we go from there.
All right. Thank you. Director, you know, considering the conversation in our prior, before we mentioned the scoring request for information, I'm wondering, do we have the, I mean, this is now available on our website. I'm wondering if there's a call for comments that would be appropriate or something like that to help inform the discussion. I may be digging a hole again. I'm not trying to, but my point is that we have done everything in a fully transparent way, and sometimes that just the nature of the beast requires a certain amount of process.
So, Mr. Chairman, I am philosophically supportive of that. And I will say along the way, there's been plenty of people on social media telling us what the criteria should have been.
Should.
But if you wanted to get into the conversation about what would potentially bog down the team in terms of productivity, if we start getting hundreds of comments on that and we need to triage them
Okay.
in some way, I'm very much open to the thought of doing that. If there's a way to make it, I don't know,
Elegant and efficient.
yeah, streamlined.
Yeah.
I would be all for it, but that's where I worry about
Okay.
having tons of comments coming in.
Yeah.
10% of them are legitimate, 90% are trolling, that kind of thing.
So I think we're in sort of an interesting conundrum in the sense of number one, being transparent, number two, advising folks a priori in a timely fashion, and number three, being somewhat responsive. So perhaps that's a challenge that we can kind of consider as to how to make that work a little better. Commissioner Pope, is that something you'd be?
Oh, I don't have any issues with that at all. I think that the discussion of what the criteria is something that the working groups did a very good job of
Yeah.
analyzing. Yeah, could it be better? I don't think anything's ever perfect, but I also think that we, through the process, have been able to look at other things that we didn't consider before, and we are opening it up. And part of part of our process would be to look at the responses anyway and say, and because I don't think there are candidates out there that would not feel free to let us know if we were looking at something incorrectly. So I think indirectly we will have comments, and we will always consider those. And then, the timeline is something that at some point we have to consider, cutoffs for the consideration and things like that, where we then can't modify the criteria after that, and then look at possibly modifying it for the next period of time. But there's lots to consider, and in many ways, we are building the plane while we're flying it. But
Yeah.
it is something that we are trying very hard to anticipate problems and fix them as we go along.
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Meyer.
Just, this is question information. When is our next, board meeting, which we could approve criteria?
So through the chair, Commissioner Meyer, our next meeting is March 20th. And if we flip back to page three of the candidate blockchain assessment update memo, that is exactly what we're talking about, right? We can work internally over the next month to come up with any criteria. We can push those forward in a public forum on the 20th and distribute them all with the data we're collecting on the 21st. That gives everybody about a month to see what those criteria are, let us know, and we can work directly with them once we have that contact info, get those first-party sources, like you said, and have the conversation. And, these are, depending on, again, how negotiations work and, again, always downstream of stress testing and compliance, but if, the smart contract developer we're working with can support these chains out of the box, it does behoove us to try to get more people in the pool with us, while, of course, not sacrificing quality, but getting more people in the pool so we can keep expanding the network, expanding liquidity, and keep building.
We'll have right at a month. I don't know if that's the right number or not, but just a try.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Pope.
one last thing, thank you. The blockchain scoring request for information and consideration, do you need approval on that, or is that just an example, Director Apollo?
Through the chair, Commissioner Pope, this is simply a form we have on Notion to collect a series of fairly anodyne information. I don't think we need an approval on this, but at the behest of the commission.
Again, I think that's great. We're trying to find the balance here between our advise and consent and oversight function and micromanaging on my part. So thank you for your patience with me.
Very good, thank you. Director, is there anything more to come before us?
Mr. Chairman, I think we can start winding down. I'll discuss a couple of next steps.
Okay.
So, of course, as I mentioned, vendor negotiating and contracting. Q1 blockchain qualification results. That should not say results. That should say criteria, as we just discussed. So again, just to say we'll be working on that along the way. And then one of the things we want to get done at the next meeting is kind of putting the brass tacks to copyright and IP protections around the name and the design of the token, right? So that we've had discussions with Secretary of State's office and and university on the bucking horse and rider. We've done some preliminary work about the word mark and defining that. There might be a bit of a balance about what happens in executive session around that, and then we kind of come out to take a vote and hit the deploy button on the USPTO website. But so there'll be a little bit of prepping for that one. But the point is, if we're going to be launching in the near future, we want to start getting all of our ducks in a row when it comes to copyright protections, both word mark and design mark. In terms of upcoming events, as we said, March 20th is our next monthly meeting, followed by April 17th. And between the two of those, I will be attending the DC Blockchain Summit on March 26th and speaking at that event. So unless there's any other questions for me, which I'm happy to answer, Mr. Chairman, we would have public comment. I'll note that duration is limited to 3 minutes per speaking party or 1 question from online participants. Speakers will be asked to provide their first and last names for the public record. The decorum will be governed by the rules and standards of Management Council Policy 1803.
Very good. Any comments? All right.
Quiet. Okay.
Fantastic. Well,
Guess that's a motion to adjourn then.
I would entertain a motion to adjourn. It's been moved by Commissioner Pope, seconded by Commissioner Wallace, I guess.
Yep.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.